A king stood at the head of an army, surrounded by thousands of warriors, defending the power of a kingdom that had been built only one generation before. To the outside world, Israel appeared strong. Its cities were growing, its armies were feared, its king sat upon a throne that represented power and success. But Nadab did not know that the greatest threat to his throne was not outside the walls of Israel. It was already inside his own kingdom. This is the story of a king who inherited a kingdom, but also inherited the consequences of the choices made before him. To understand the short reign of Nadab, we must first return to the beginning, to the man who built the throne he would inherit, Jeroboam, the first king of Israel. The crown of Israel had passed from father to son. But a throne is never only a seat of power. It is also a reminder of everything that came before. When Nadab became king, he inherited a kingdom unlike any other in Israel's history. It was a nation born from division, a kingdom created by conflict, and a throne built upon decisions that would shape generations to come. To understand Nadab's short reign, we must first return to the beginning of the northern kingdom, to the man who built the throne Nadab would inherit. His name was Jeroboam. After the death of King Solomon, the united kingdom of Israel fractured. The tribes of the north rejected Solomon's son Rehoboam as king, and the nation was divided. The southern kingdom of Judah remained under the house of David, but the northern tribes formed a new kingdom, Israel. The people of the north needed a leader, and they chose Jeroboam, a man who had once served in Solomon's administration before rising as the first king of this new nation. At first, Jeroboam had an opportunity unlike any king before him. He could establish a kingdom built on faithfulness to God. He could lead the people without repeating the mistakes of the past. But fear changed his path. Jeroboam worried that if the people continued traveling to Jerusalem to worship at the temple, their loyalty would eventually return to the house of David. So instead of trusting the promises of God, Jeroboam chose to protect his throne through his own plans. He established new centers of worship at Bethel and Dan. There, he created golden calf images and told Israel, "Here are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt." The decision seemed practical. It strengthened his political control. It gave his new kingdom a separate identity. But spiritually, it placed Israel on a dangerous path. The kingdom continued to grow. Cities expanded, trade increased, armies became stronger. From the outside, Israel appeared successful. But beneath the surface, the foundation was weakening. The prophets warned that a kingdom built on rebellion could not stand forever. And one prophet in particular, Ahijah of Shiloh, delivered a message that would follow Jeroboam's family for generations. The prophet declared that because Jeroboam had turned Israel away from the Lord, judgment would eventually come upon his house. Years passed. Jeroboam's reign came to an end, and the crown moved to the next generation. His son Nadab now stood where his father had stood. He was young. He was inexperienced.
and he inherited not only a kingdom, but also a crisis. Nadab became the second king of the northern kingdom of Israel. The people looked to their new ruler with hope. Perhaps this son would choose a different path. Perhaps the mistakes of the past would not define the future. But the throne of Israel carried a heavy burden, because Nadab was not starting a new story. He was continuing one that had already been written. And soon the consequences of his father's choices would begin to reach his own generation. The throne of Israel now belonged to Nadab. The son of Jeroboam had inherited everything his father had built: a kingdom, an army, a royal city, and a throne that carried the weight of a dangerous legacy. At first glance, Nadab appeared to have everything a young king could desire. The northern kingdom was established. Its borders were protected, its cities continued to grow, and its people had experienced years of stability. But the greatest challenges facing Nadab were not found on the battlefield. They were found in the decisions made before he ever wore the crown. The scriptures record that Nadab followed the ways of his father. Like Jeroboam before him, he continued to worship practices that had separated Israel from the Lord. The golden calves at Bethel and Dan remained. The priests appointed by his father continued their service, and the kingdom continued down the same path that had been established at its beginning. To many within Israel, these practices may have seemed normal. They had become part of the nation's identity, a tradition passed from one generation to another. But the prophets understood something the people could not see. A nation can appear strong while its foundation is slowly weakening. During Nadab's reign, Israel remained a powerful kingdom. The fields produced harvests. Trade continued along the ancient roads. The army remained organized and capable. But history would soon reveal that outward strength could not protect a kingdom from internal weakness. Nadab's reign was short. The Bible records that he ruled over Israel for only 2 years. Yet those 2 years would place him at the center of a turning point in Israel's history. Because while Nadab ruled from Tirzah, conflict continued along Israel's borders. One of those conflicts took Israel's army toward the city of Gibbethon. Gibbethon was a Philistine city that had long been a place of struggle between Israel and its enemies. Years earlier, Israel had fought there. Now Nadab returned with his army to continue the campaign. The king rode with his soldiers, surrounded by the strength of the northern kingdom. Thousands marched beneath Israel's banners. Bronze shields reflected the sunlight. Spears rose above the dust of the battlefield. To those watching from outside, Nadab looked like a successful king, a ruler leading his nation into battle, a son continuing the legacy of his father. But hidden among the soldiers was a man whose name would soon change the future of Israel. His name was Baasha. He was not a king. He was not born into the royal family. He was a military commander. But history often changes through people who stand quietly in the background before their moment arrives. As Nadab led Israel's army against Gibbethon, Baasha watched. while the king focused on the enemy outside the walls,
a greater danger was forming within his own kingdom.
the crown that Nadab inherited was already fragile.
And soon, the son of Israel's first king would discover that a throne built on unstable foundations could fall faster than anyone expected.
For nearly 2 years, King Nadab had ruled over the northern kingdom of Israel.
He had inherited a throne built by his father, Jeroboam I, a kingdom strengthened by military power, growing cities, and expanding influence.
Yet beneath that appearance of strength, the spiritual wounds left by earlier decisions had never healed.
Now outside the Philistine city of Gibbethon, history was about to change forever.
The Israelite army remained focused on the siege. Soldiers repaired their weapons. Officers planned the next day's movements. Watchmen guarded the camp throughout the night. Everything appeared normal. No one imagined that the greatest danger was not behind the walls of Gibbethon, but inside Israel's own ranks.
Among the commanders stood a man named Baasha. For days he had watched.
He had learned the routines of the royal camp. He understood when the king met with his officers.
He knew where the guards were posted. Patiently, he waited for the moment that would change his life and the future of an entire nation. The Bible records the events in only a few short verses. Yet those verses describe one of the most dramatic political changes in Israel's history. Baasha, the son of Ahijah from the tribe of Issachar, conspired against King Nadab. The conspiracy was carried out while Israel continued its military campaign against the Philistine city of Gibbethon. At Gibbethon, while the army remained focused on the siege, Baasha struck. King Nadab was killed. Just as suddenly as his reign had begun, it ended. Only 2 years after inheriting the throne of Israel, the son of Jeroboam was gone. The first dynasty of the northern kingdom stood on the brink of destruction. Baasha wasted no time securing his new position. Every remaining member of Jeroboam's household became a potential rival. According to Scripture, Baasha left none of Jeroboam's family alive. Every possible heir, every male descendant, every relative who could challenge the throne, all were put to death. What appeared to be political ambition also fulfilled a prophecy spoken years earlier. The prophet Ahijah had warned Jeroboam that because he had turned Israel away from the Lord, his dynasty would not continue. At the time, those words may have seemed impossible. Jeroboam had built cities. He had commanded armies. He had established a kingdom. Yet God's word remained unchanged. Years later, outside the walls of Gibbethon, the prophecy came to pass exactly as it had been spoken. The first royal dynasty of the northern kingdom had come to an end. One king fell. Another took his place. Baasha now wore the crown of Israel. The soldiers pledged their loyalty to a new king. The royal banner still waved above the camp. The army still marched beneath the same skies. Life appeared to continue as before. But although the throne had changed hands, the deeper problem facing Israel remained. The nation had replaced one ruler,
it had not yet changed its heart. The choices Baasha would make would determine whether Israel finally returned to the Lord or continued walking the same dangerous path that had already destroyed one dynasty. When Baasha took the throne of Israel, he inherited more than a crown. He inherited a kingdom built upon rebellion. The northern tribes had separated from the house of David years earlier, and since that moment, every king who sat upon Israel's throne carried the weight of a difficult question. Would this king lead the people back toward God, or would he continue down the same path that had brought judgment upon the previous dynasty? Baasha had risen from the ranks of the military. He was not born into royalty. He was a commander who saw an opportunity, removed Nadab from power, and established himself as the third king of the northern kingdom. To the people of Israel, his rise may have appeared to be a moment of strength. A strong leader had replaced a weak one. A warrior had taken the throne. Every king who sat upon the throne of Israel faced the same question. Would he lead the people back to the Lord? Or would he continue the path that had already brought judgment upon those who came before him? The history of Israel was not measured only by military victories, wealth, or the strength of its cities. God looked deeper. He looked at the hearts of kings. He looked at the faithfulness of his people. A king could build walls around a city. He could strengthen an army. He could expand borders. But no king could protect Israel from the consequences of turning away from God. Baasha now held the throne. He had power. He had authority. He had the support of the army. But he also inherited a spiritual crisis that began long before his reign. The question was not whether Baasha could rule Israel. The question was whether Baasha would honor the God who allowed him to rule. The same spiritual disease that had weakened Jeroboam's reign continued under Baasha. The golden calves remained. The royal worship centers remained. The people continued following the religious system that had been created to replace the worship of the Lord in Jerusalem. Baasha had removed a dynasty, but he had not removed the sin that destroyed that dynasty. The northern kingdom had changed kings. It had not changed direction. The years passed. Baasha focused on strengthening the northern kingdom. He expanded Israel's defenses and worked to secure his borders against every threat. But one kingdom remained at the center of his concern. To the south, King Asa ruled over Judah. Though Israel and Judah had once been one nation, they had become rival kingdoms. Each watched the other carefully. The peace between them grew increasingly fragile.
Eventually, Baasha turned his attention to the city of Ramah. It stood near the border between Israel and Judah. Whoever controlled Ramah could influence the roads that connected the two kingdoms. Baasha ordered the city to be fortified. Stone walls rose higher. Watchtowers overlooked the roads. His goal was clear. He intended to strengthen his kingdom by controlling who entered and who left Israel.
Fortifications at Ramah did not go unnoticed. King Asa of Judah understood exactly what Baasha was trying to accomplish. If Ramah remained under Israel's control, Judah's trade routes, military movement, and communication with the north could all be threatened. The growing fortress was more than a military outpost. It was a declaration of power. The fragile peace between the two kingdoms
had reached a dangerous turning point.
While kings measured power by armies and fortresses, the Lord measured something far greater. God had watched every decision Baasha made. He had seen the pride that grew with power. He had seen the king continue the sins that had already brought judgment upon Israel. So once again, the Lord sent a prophet. His name was Jehu, the son of Hanani. He came with a message that Baasha could not ignore. Jehu stood before the king with unwavering courage. He reminded Baasha that it was the Lord who had raised him from an ordinary man to become ruler over Israel. Yet instead of leading the nation back to God, Baasha had followed the same sinful path as Jeroboam. The throne had changed hands, but the rebellion had remained. Then Jehu declared the judgment of the Lord. Because Baasha had led Israel into sin, his dynasty would suffer the same fate as the house of Jeroboam. The warning echoed through the royal court. Earthly kingdoms would rise and fall, but the word of God would always stand. After the prophet Jehu departed from the royal court, life in Israel appeared to continue as it always had. King Baasha remained upon the throne. The cities remained fortified. The armies continued their patrols. The markets remained busy. To the people, the kingdom appeared secure. Yet beneath the appearance of stability, the word of the Lord remained unchanged. Every decision Baasha made now unfolded beneath the shadow of God's judgment. The king could command armies. He could strengthen cities. He could build fortresses. But no earthly ruler could escape the words spoken by the Lord.
Baasha believed the strength of Israel rested in its walls, its armies, and its alliances. He continued reinforcing the kingdom's defenses and maintaining control over its borders. The soldiers remained disciplined. The commanders remained loyal. The fortresses stood firm against every visible threat. But the greatest danger facing Israel could not be stopped by stone walls or bronze shields. A kingdom may appear strong before men, yet still stand vulnerable before the judgment of God. Baasha had secured his throne with power. He would soon learn that power alone could not preserve a dynasty.
Baasha ruled Israel for 24 years from the city of Tirzah. His reign brought military stability and political strength to the northern kingdom. Yet despite his accomplishments, he never turned Israel back to the Lord. The years passed. The kingdom continued its daily routines. Then, as every earthly reign eventually does, Baasha's came to an end. He died and was buried in Tirzah. His son Elah inherited the throne of Israel. The crown passed from father to son. But the prophecy spoken by Jehu had not been forgotten. It was only beginning to unfold.
Elah inherited a kingdom that appeared strong. His father had left behind fortified cities, experienced commanders, and a well-established government. But a secure kingdom does not guarantee a secure king. Unlike Baasha, Elah never earned his throne through years of struggle. He inherited it. As the days passed, his attention slowly drifted away from the responsibilities of leadership. While the kingdom depended upon wise decisions, unseen dangers were already beginning to gather around him.
While Israel's army remained stationed at Gibbethon, King Elah stayed behind in Tirzah. The responsibilities of war rested upon his commanders. The king remained within the safety of the royal city. One day, Elah visited the home of Arzah, the steward responsible for the royal household. There, surrounded by trusted servants and familiar faces, the king relaxed, believing he had nothing to fear. Yet the greatest danger was not waiting beyond Israel's borders. It had already entered the kingdom, and it was drawing closer with every passing moment. While Elah remained unaware of the danger around him, another man had already made his decision. His name was Zimri. He was the commander of half of Elah's chariots, a position that placed him close to the center of Israel's military power. But Zimri was no longer content to serve the king. He wanted the throne for himself. While Israel's army remained at Gibbethon, Zimri saw an opportunity. The king was far from the army, the capital was vulnerable, and the royal household was unprepared for what was about to happen. Zimri began moving toward his plan. He would strike when Elah least expected it. Inside the house of Arza, Elah remained unaware of what was coming. The king had lowered his guard. He believed himself safe among trusted servants and familiar surroundings. But Zimri had already reached Tirzah. The commander entered the royal household and struck when Elah least expected it. King Elah was killed. The news spread quickly through the city. A king who had inherited his father's throne was now dead. And Zimri immediately claimed the crown for himself. In a single moment, the house of Baasha had begun to collapse. The prophecy spoken by Jehu years earlier was no longer merely a warning. It was becoming reality.
Zimri had taken the throne, but taking the crown was only the beginning. Jehu's prophecy had declared that the entire house of Baasha would face judgment. So Zimri turned against every remaining member of Baasha's family. The house that had once ruled Israel was destroyed. Baasha was gone. His son Elah was gone. And now the royal household that had carried Baasha's name disappeared from the kingdom. What had taken years to build was swept away in a single generation. The dynasty that had begun with Baasha ended with bloodshed and betrayal. And once again, the history of Israel revealed a sobering truth. A throne could be seized by human hands. A kingdom could be defended by armies. But no king could overturn the word of God.
Zimri had accomplished what few men in Israel's history had dared to attempt. He had killed the king. He had destroyed the house of Baasha, and now he had taken the throne for himself. From the royal palace at Tirzah, Zimri was proclaimed king over Israel. The crown that had belonged to Baasha's house now rested upon his head. For the moment, it appeared that Zimri had succeeded. The kingdom had changed rulers once again.
But Zimri's victory was not secure. His path to the throne had been marked by violence, betrayal, and bloodshed. And far away at Gibbethon, Israel's army remained in the field. Those soldiers had not fought for Zimri. They had not chosen him, and they would soon have a decision of their own to make. Zimri had taken the throne, but he had yet to win the kingdom.
Far from Tirzah, the army of Israel remained at Gibbethon. The soldiers had been fighting against the Philistines when unexpected news reached their camp. King Elah was dead. Zimri had killed him. And now, Zimri had taken the throne. For the soldiers at Gibbethon, The news was more than a report from the capital. It was a challenge to the entire order of the kingdom. Their king had been murdered. The throne had been seized. And the man responsible was not with them on the battlefield. The commanders gathered to discuss what had happened. They knew that Israel could not remain leaderless. Someone would have to unite the army. Someone would have to lead the kingdom. And as the soldiers listened, one name began to rise above the others. Omri, the commander of the army, the man who had the loyalty of the soldiers. The army's decision would soon change the course of Israel's history. The decision was no longer simply about who would command the army. It was about who would rule Israel. The soldiers at Gibbethon had lost their king. They had rejected the man who had seized the throne. Now, they needed a leader they could trust. Their choice fell upon Omri. He was already commander of the army. He understood the military. He had the loyalty of the soldiers, and he had the strength to challenge Zimri. The army gathered around him. Before the soldiers of Israel, Omri was proclaimed king. The decision changed everything. Zimri might possess the palace at Tirzah, but Omri possessed the army. And the army was now marching for the capital. Omri's decision had been made. The army was no longer waiting at Gibbethon. Israel's soldiers broke camp and began the long march toward Tirzah. Behind them were the battlefields where they had been fighting the Philistines. Ahead of them stood the capital and the man who had seized Israel's throne. Omri marched at the head of the army. The soldiers followed with shields, spears, and swords. Chariots rolled along the road, while horses carried supplies and officers. With every mile, the army moved closer to Tirzah. Inside the capital, Zimri watched the situation change. The king who had believed he had secured his throne now faced an army that had chosen another ruler. The palace guards could protect the walls, but they could not create an army large enough to defeat the force approaching the city. Zimri's 7-day reign was quickly becoming a struggle for survival, and the army of Israel was coming for him. Zimri had wanted the crown. He had believed that by removing Elah, he could remove the last obstacle between himself and the throne. But the crown came with a price he had not expected. His reign was already measured in days. Only 7 days would pass between the moment Zimri seized the throne and the moment his own life would come to an end. 7 days. For a king, it was barely a reign at all. Inside Tirzah, Zimri remained surrounded by the symbols of royal power. The throne was his, the palace was his, the crown was his. But outside the walls, the army of Israel had chosen another king. Every passing hour brought Omri's forces closer. Zimri's authority was shrinking as quickly as his enemies were advancing. The palace that had once represented power now felt like a place of isolation. Zimri had gained the kingdom through violence, and now he was discovering that violence could not guarantee loyalty. His 7-day reign was becoming a warning written into the history of Israel. Omri's army had reached Tirzah. The capital that Zimri had seized only days earlier was now surrounded. The soldiers of Israel filled the hills around the city. Their shields caught the sunlight. Their spears stood in ordered ranks. Their chariots waited behind the lines. And above the walls of Tirzah, Zimri's defenders watched the army that had come to remove him. There was no longer any doubt about what was happening. The army had chosen Omri.
Zimri had been rejected, and now the struggle for the throne had become a struggle for the city itself. Omri did not need to storm the walls immediately. His army was already in control of the surrounding countryside. The roads were blocked, the gates were watched, and the pressure upon Tirzah continued to grow. Inside the city, fear began spreading among the people. Some wondered whether Zimri could survive. Others wondered whether the city itself would survive. But Zimri remained in the palace. The man who had taken the kingdom in a single violent act now faced the consequences of his decision. Outside the walls, Omri waited. Inside the walls, Zimri had nowhere to go.
The siege of Tirzah had changed everything. Zimri had once entered the palace as a victorious king. Now the walls around him offered no escape. Omri's army had closed every road. The gates were watched. The soldiers outside waited. And inside the palace, Zimri understood what was coming. He had only been king for 7 days. 7 days since he had killed Elah. 7 days since he had seized the throne. 7 days since he had believed that the kingdom was finally his. Now, that same kingdom was closing in around him. Zimri could no longer rely upon the army. He could no longer depend upon the people. And he could no longer defend the throne he had taken. His final hours had arrived. Rather than surrender the palace to the forces of Omri, Zimri withdrew toward the fortified citadel. The throne room was left behind. The royal halls became silent. And the man who had reached for the crown through violence now faced the final consequence of his actions. Zimri had won the throne, but he had lost everything else. Zimri had reached the end. The army of Omri had entered Tirzah. The city that had once accepted Zimri as king could no longer protect him. Inside the royal palace, the final moments of his reign had arrived. Zimri knew that capture was coming. He had seized the throne through bloodshed. He had ruled for only 7 days. And now, the kingdom he had taken was being torn from his hands. According to the account recorded in the Book of Kings, Zimri saw that the city had been taken. He entered the citadel of the royal house, and there he set the palace on fire around himself. The flames rose through the royal chambers. Smoke filled the halls. The banners of his brief reign disappeared into the fire. The throne he had desired was consumed. Zimri's story had begun with an act of violence, and it ended in destruction. He had become king of Israel, but only for 7 days. And when those 7 days were over, the dynasty of Baasha was finished. Zimri was dead, and another king stood ready to claim the throne. Zimri's story had ended. His reign had lasted only 7 days. The palace he had seized was destroyed. The dynasty of Baasha had come to an end. And Omri now stood as the man who had been chosen by the army of Israel. But the kingdom itself had not been healed. Israel was still divided. The northern kingdom had already passed through the reigns of Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah,
and Zimri. Kings had risen,
Kings had fallen, and the people had continued to live beneath the shadow of political violence and spiritual rebellion. Zimri's 7 days had revealed something deeper than the weakness of one man. The throne of Israel had become unstable because the kingdom had turned away from the Lord. The crown could be seized, armies could be commanded, palaces could be occupied, but none of these things could guarantee the future of a king.
Omri had won the throne. Yet another chapter was only beginning. The northern kingdom would continue. Its kings would continue. Its wars would continue. And the consequences of Israel's choices would continue to unfold. Zimri had ruled for only 7 days, but the story of Israel was far from over.
Zimri's reign had lasted only 7 days, but those 7 days had revealed something that would remain with Israel for generations. The kingdom could change kings without changing its heart. Jeroboam had established the northern kingdom. Nadab had inherited it. Baasha had taken it. Elah had received it. Zimri had seized it.
And now Omri had claimed it. King after king had risen to the throne, but the kingdom remained divided. The story of Zimri was not simply the story of a man who failed to hold a crown. It was the story of what happened when power became more important than obedience. Zimri believed that taking the throne would make him secure. Instead, his reign disappeared almost as quickly as it had begun. 7 days. That was all.
The palace he entered as a king became the place of his destruction. The crown he desired could not save him. And the kingdom he tried to control continued without him. Israel's story was moving forward, but the same spiritual problem remained. And the next chapter would bring another king, another struggle, and another opportunity for Israel to choose whether it would follow the Lord. Zimri was gone, but the divided kingdom remained, and its story was far from finished.